Exodus 11. The plague on the firstborn. The Lord informed Moses of one final, decisive plague that would compel Pharaoh to release the Israelites entirely. God instructed the Israelites to request silver and gold from their Egyptian neighbors, as he had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward them. Moreover, Moses was well regarded by Pharaoh's officials and the Egyptian people. Moses conveyed God's message to Pharaoh, announcing that around midnight the Lord would pass through Egypt, causing the death of every firstborn son, from Pharaoh's heir to the firstborn of the humblest servant. Even the firstborn of the cattle would perish. The ensuing outcry in Egypt would be unparalleled, while the Israelites would remain untouched, emphasizing God's distinction between Egypt and Israel. Moses declared that Pharaoh's officials would eventually plead for the Israelites' departure, and he left Pharaoh in anger. The Lord reiterated to Moses that Pharaoh's refusal was part of his plan to showcase his wonders throughout Egypt. Despite the signs and wonders performed by Moses and Aaron, Pharaoh's heart was hardened by the Lord, preventing him from releasing the Israelites at that time. Exodus 12. The Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread. God instructed Moses and Aaron to mark the first month of their year with the Passover. Each family was to select a year-old male lamb without defect on the 10th day of the month, sharing with neighboring families if necessary. The lambs were to be cared for until the 14th day, when the entire community would slaughter them at twilight. Blood from the lambs was to be placed on the doorframes of houses where the lambs would be eaten. That night, the meat was to be roasted over fire and eaten with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. God commanded them to eat with haste, dressed for travel, as it was the Lord's Passover. God would pass through Egypt, striking down every firstborn of both people and animals, executing judgment against the gods of Egypt. However, the blood on the houses would serve as a sign, sparing those within from the plague. Observance of Passover and Unleavened Bread Festival. God ordained that the Passover be commemorated as a lasting ordinance, together with the festival of unleavened bread, starting on the 14th day and lasting 7 days. All yeast was to be removed from homes, and sacred assemblies held on the 1st and 7th days. Only essential food preparation work was allowed during the festival. Execution and Exodus. Moses instructed the Israelite elders to select and slaughter the Passover lambs and apply the blood to their doorframes to avert the plague. They were to remain indoors until morning. The Israelites were urged to observe this ceremony perpetually, passing its significance down to future generations. The Lord spared their homes during the plague in Egypt. At midnight, the Lord struck down all Egyptian firstborns, including Pharaoh's heir, prisoners, and livestock, leading to widespread mourning. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, urging them to leave with their people, freeing them to worship God and requesting a blessing. Departure from Egypt. In urgency, the Egyptians pressed the Israelites to depart, fearing divine wrath. The Israelites took their unleavened dough and received silver, gold, and clothing from the Egyptians, plundering them as God had influenced their favor. Around 600,000 men, along with women, children, and a mixed multitude with livestock, began their journey from Ramesses to Sukkoth. The Israelites baked unleavened bread with their dough. The sojourn in Egypt lasted 430 years to the day. Passover regulations. God provided further details to Moses and Aaron about the Passover. No foreigner could partake unless circumcised. Neither temporary residents nor hired workers were allowed. The meal was to be eaten in one house without breaking any bones. The regulations were uniform for native-born and foreign residents who wished to join. The entire community adhered to God's commands, and on that day, God led the Israelites out of Egypt in their divisions. Exodus 13. Consecration of the firstborn. The Lord instructed Moses to consecrate to him every firstborn male among the Israelites, both human and animal, as they belonged to him. Moses reminded the people to commemorate the day of liberation from slavery in Egypt by God's mighty hand, with instructions to eat nothing containing yeast. This observance was to be repeated annually in the month of Aviv. Once they reached the promised land, flowing with milk and honey, Moses stressed the importance of the 7-day festival of unleavened bread, culminating in a sacred assembly. This ceremony was a reminder of God's deliverance and a teaching moment for future generations. The firstborn males, both of humans and livestock, were to be given over to the Lord. Firstborn donkeys had to be redeemed with a lamb, or their necks broken if not redeemed. Human firstborns were also to be redeemed. Inquiries from children about these practices were to be answered by recounting God's mighty action in Egypt, crossing the sea. When Pharaoh released the Israelites, God led them in a roundabout way towards the Red Sea, instead of the more direct route through Philistine territory, to prevent them from facing war and potentially returning to Egypt. Moses took Joseph's bones with them, honoring the oath the Israelites had sworn to Joseph centuries earlier. Departing from Sukkoth, the Israelites camped at Etham on the desert's edge. God did not leave them to wander alone. He guided them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, ensuring they could travel at any time. These divine signs were constant, leading the way on their journey. Exodus 14. Crossing the Red Sea. The Lord instructed Moses to lead the Israelites to encamp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon. God forewarned that Pharaoh would pursue them, thinking they were trapped, and he intended to gain glory through Pharaoh's defeat, proving his dominion. Pharaoh and his officials regretted releasing the Israelites, realizing they had lost their slaves. Pharaoh mobilized his army, including 600 select chariots, to pursue them. The Egyptians overtook the Israelites camped by the sea. In fear, the Israelites lamented to Moses, questioning their liberation and expressing a preference for servitude over death in the desert. Moses urged them not to fear, promising divine deliverance and that the Egyptians they feared would vanish. God instructed Moses to cease crying out and to lead the Israelites forward. He was to raise his staff and stretch his hand over the sea to part it, enabling their passage on dry ground. God assured glory through the Egyptians' downfall. During the night, the angel of God and the pillar of cloud shifted behind the Israelites, creating darkness for the Egyptians and light for the Israelites, preventing any approach. Moses stretched his hand over the sea, and God sent a strong east wind that divided the waters, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground with walls of water on either side. The Egyptians pursued them into the sea. During the night, God threw the Egyptians into confusion, jamming their chariot wheels. Realizing God was fighting for the Israelites, they sought to flee. God commanded Moses to stretch his hand again over the sea, causing the waters to return and cover the Egyptian forces, leaving none alive. The Israelites crossed safely on dry ground, and upon seeing the Egyptians' defeat and their bodies on the shore, they saw God's mighty hand at work. This instilled fear and trust in the Lord and his servant Moses among the people. Exodus 15. The Song of Moses and Miriam. After crossing the Red Sea and witnessing the Lord's deliverance from Pharaoh's army, Moses and the Israelites sang a song of triumph to the Lord. The song praised God for his majesty, power, and the miraculous destruction of Egypt's forces, emphasizing his role as a mighty warrior and the Israelites' deliverer. The song celebrated God's majestic power, describing how he hurled Pharaoh's army into the sea, where the waters covered them. The Israelites exalted God as their strength and salvation, noting his unmatched holiness and glory, and his ability to work wonders. The narrative recounted how God's breath piled up the waters, enabling safe passage through the sea, and then overwhelming their pursuers. The song also prophesied future fear among the nations, including Philistia, Edom, Moab, and Canaan, as they would hear of the Lord's mighty acts. It proclaimed that God would lead the redeemed people to his holy dwelling and reign forever. Following the song, Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, led the women in song and dance, celebrating the Lord's triumph over the Egyptian forces. The waters of Marah and Elim Moses led the Israelites from the Red Sea into the desert of Shur, where they traveled for 3 days without finding water. Upon reaching Marah, they discovered the water there was bitter and undrinkable, leading the people to grumble against Moses. Moses cried out to the Lord, who showed him a piece of wood. When Moses threw the wood into the water, it became fit to drink, demonstrating the Lord's provision. There, God issued a decree and instruction, testing the Israelites. He promised that if they obeyed his commands, he would protect them from the diseases inflicted on the Egyptians, affirming his identity as the healer. The Israelites then traveled to Elim, where they found 12 springs and 70 palm trees, offering them a place to camp by the water and rest.